Yeah, man. I really appreciate it. And I guess to the guys that are just wondering or maybe thinking, should they go seek help or should they not or whatever, it's like, dude, just do, because what's the worst thing that can happen? Nobody's going to embarrass you, like go, and if you talk to somebody and they say, hey, you're actually coping really well, I think you're doing fine. And if you feel that that's the case, that's great. You took an hour out of your day. But maybe it'll change your life. Maybe you'll realize that there is some stuff you could work on. And then the other part too is like, don't compare yourself to the other guys around you, because we're really bad at self-disqualifying.
Mm-hmm.
We look at guys with silver stars or all these Valor awards, and if it looks externally like they're doing fine, we tell ourselves like that we must be doing fine too, because you're not as bad as this guy. Again, like comparison is the thief of joy, and it also is an easy way to like convince yourself that you're fine if this guy's fine.
Today on the 38 Challenge podcast, we have on Bryan Ray. Bryan served 20 years in the Army, most of which with the Special Forces, and very recently retired.
Yep.
Bryan, thank you for coming on the show today, man.
Yeah, thanks, man. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. How's the transition been so far?
It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a roller coaster. Like emotionally, you put behind something that you've been involved in for such a long time, and enter the unknown. And there's times where you think that you're gonna crush the world and you're super excited and optimistic, and there's times where you wonder if you should have stayed in or if you just want to disappear. So there's a lot of that, but I've kind of moved past that a little bit, and now the excitement's definitely kicked in. I'm happy to have done what I've done, but I'm also happy to not do it anymore. So
Absolutely. What's been the most rewarding part of transition?
I think it's opening my aperture has been a huge part of it, because when you're in, that's your whole life, and everything you're doing and everything you're going to do, it revolves around being in the service. And, I don't really look at other opportunities outside of it. I don't really explore that. And getting involved with people on the outside who run a different world, just meeting different people, really kind of opens up the different opportunities that are available, and lets you know that like, hey man, like getting out of the military isn't the end of it. There's a lot more out there. So I think the really, that's kind of, I guess, the most exciting thing on getting out, and is just seeing what else is out there and driving towards it. So
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we got some awesome sushi last night.
Yeah.
Didn't sit well with me, but had an awesome conversation, and I know that this will help a lot of people. So
yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
Really appreciate you for having me on, man.
Yeah.
So why don't you go a little bit into your history with the Special Forces?
Yeah. So I joined the Army in 2003, and I joined as an infantry guy, airborne infantry, unassigned. That's really all I wanted to be at that time. I never really planned on making a career out of it, but I just knew I wasn't ready for college. I knew that I needed to do something else, and if I was going to join the Army, I was going to go infantry. I wanted to do a combat arms job, and I just ended up liking it. I didn't really enjoying it. That first year I was in, within just a couple months of getting to my unit, we got a 30-day notice to deploy, and 30 days later I was in Iraq. So 18, and I'd already been in my first gunfight, and like already like
crazy,
seen bad shit, and already like fired my gun in anger at people, and still felt like a kid, And to be honest, I didn't feel like I wasn't a kid until way later on down the road. So it was like, it was just such a wild ride. But the longer I was in, the more I realized that I wanted to be with guys that cared as much as I did. And it's not to say that everyone I worked with, wasn't at that caliber, but there's good guys and there's not good guys. And it's not like that goes away when you get into higher tiered units, but there's less of that. So I wanted to work with guys who were super passionate and super smart. And, everything I'd heard, especially with my dad having come from SF as well, is that SF is where that's at, or one of the special operations, that way they good range battalion or whatever. So, yeah, I put in my packet to go SF. unfortunately, I got derailed by a recruiting tour I had to take care of. So I did 2 years as a recruiter.
Mm.
And then from there, I was able to go to the Q course and start my SF journey. So I spent about 2 years at Bragg. I was going to be an 18 Echo, so it's a communicator and an Arabic speaker. So finished that and got sent to 10th group. And that's really where like that once I got to the teams, that's where it all started. So that was 2009 is when I first got to the teams. So from there, I guess just to kind of like overarch it, I spent my first couple years on a mountain team. From there, went to become an instructor at the mountain school. And when I was done with that, I commissioned to become a warrant officer, came back, took a mountain team for another couple of combat tours, and then finished off running the mountain school for SOCOM. And that was my last position in the Army. So pretty much all my SF time was all mountain related in some aspect. Got to get a couple good combat deployments out of it. And I'd say there's not really anything that I didn't get to do that I thought I was going to. You know, I think I checked all the blocks, like of all those things I expected I would do as an SF guy. So I guess that's kind of overarching, like how that looked. Yeah,
100%. Yeah, and I wanted to touch on your leadership history because I think that that's important for where we're going to go.
Yeah,
and the type of conversation that we're about to have. And I'm curious to know, as a leader, what is your definition of vulnerability and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. I think vulnerability in a leadership position goes really hand in hand with trust, because being vulnerable as a leader is being able to ask for help when you don't know the answer. Mm-hmm. And if you trust the guys you have that you're in charge of, then you can open up to those guys. Because in reality, as a leader, your job isn't to know everything. Your job isn't to be the best at every single aspect. Your job is to be able to manage and train and mentor and motivate. Like, there's a lot more to the leadership role. It doesn't mean you're the best at that. I mean, look at NFL coaches. Like, is the quarterback, is the offensive coordinator, is the, quarterback's coach, whatever, is he like the best quarterback? No, but he's freaking best coach at it. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of on the leadership side too. So being vulnerable is allowing your guys to know that, hey man, like, I'm not the best at this particular thing. What do you think we should do? You're the expert here. You tell me, and it's just, it's trusting your guys. Is just such a huge part of it. So I think it's just being open and being honest with your guys. And sometimes guys think that that's a sign of weakness to say that, hey man, like, I don't want to let these guys know that I'm not the best at everything, which is kind of a ridiculous way to run them out.
Right.
But
just
opening up, I think.
Did that definition transform over time, or is that something that you had to learn? Like, is there a specific example that you can kind of think of during your leadership time?
I think as being a warrant officer, it kind of falls into place that way because, so for a special forces team, your leadership team, you've got your captain, who's your detachment commander, your 18 Zulu, who's master sergeant, who's your team sergeant, and then the warrant, who's the assistant detachment commander, but he's the other officer on the team who generally has more experience than everyone else on the team because you're going to have been there the longest. Even shoot, as a warrant on a team, you're going to go through 3 or 4, 5 maybe different team leaders and team sergeants because they rotate in and out. So you're the continuity there. So it's very common that you're constantly going to have the guys coming up to you and asking you what you think, or asking you, hey, what would you do here? Or, hey, I'm having an issue communicating with the team leader, or hey, he doesn't trust me. Or you get a lot of grievances and a lot of that. So I think naturally you get put into a position to where you got to have two choices. You can either just like shit on the guys for like not knowing or not taking care of stuff on their own, or you can like welcome it in and be a mentor. And I think when you open those lines of communications, you can become a better leader where you can open up with the guys too and be honest, so I guess it just kind of naturally got there.
Yeah. Absolutely, man. Being another conversation that we dove into a little bit last night, but excited to get more into it today, is your ability to be vulnerable and the strength to be vulnerable in your own mental health journey.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, you know, to
Yeah.
go into that story and know and show other guys that what you've been through is similar to what they may be experiencing.
Yeah. So that's definitely one of the hardest things that I had to do was, as open as I like to be and honest as I like to be with people. One of the hardest things that I had done was when I opened up about my own mental health stuff. There's stigma to it, but it wasn't really the stigma. It wasn't that I was afraid of. It wasn't the like, oh, I don't want people to think I'm weird because I've got PTSD issues. I don't even like saying I have PTSD because of like what we've put on it. But um, I don't know, man. It took a while for me to realize that I wasn't who I used to be, and that a lot of these issues I was having was because I was hiding my mental health issues. And again, like I still don't even like to like talk about it,
Oh, dude, it's
but a
the
lot
hard.
of guys have it, and I continue to disqualify myself by saying, well, I know guys who have been through some pretty rough stuff and they seem to be doing fine. So what am I complaining about? Or, I've got my own issues. I'll deal with my own issues. That's not for my wife or my kids or my team. That's not for them to have to deal with. I'll manage my shit on my own and I'll drive on, because that's what we want to do. We don't want other people to have to deal with our stuff.
Mhm.
I think that's a character trait for a lot of people.
Yep.
So honestly, it wasn't until I had a teammate of mine who had been through similar situation, and he was getting medically retired for PTSD. And he told me on his story that his wife told him that he just wasn't who he used to be, and that he was irritable, and his mood swings were wild, and he was just a different person, like a shell of who he used to be. And I was like, dude, that's kind of how I am right now.
Yeah.
So
So, what were some of those? You mentioned irritability
Yeah.
and mood swings. What
Yeah.
were some of those things that you started to recognize in your own life?
Man, I would just get angry so easily at the smallest things, especially like with my kids. Just like small disciplinary things that you expect from kids who are learning just make me so upset. And I just feel like I used to be a lot more easygoing. I never used to get, triggered about things like that. And I would just go from like being in a good mood and motivated and optimistic about life to just like, at my worst, a point to where, sometimes driving, I'd be like, man, like if something happened on this drive, like that'd be completely okay.
Yeah.
It's a pretty dark place
It
at
is.
times where I'd gone, and I would go back and forth between those two feelings for a number of years. Um, yeah, and it's just like I finally got to a point, I guess, where again, if someone hadn't reached out to me and told me, hey man, like you need to talk to this person because like you're not as okay as you think you are. I never would have healed. And I wouldn't say I'm like completely healed, but I'm in a much better place than I was, So
Yeah.
yeah. So I guess if I was answering your original question on vulnerability and all that, it was just the hardest struggle on that, it was just embarrassment, and then not wanting my problem to be someone else's problem. But when you reframe it and you realize that by not taking care of yourself, you're actually making everyone else deal with your problem even worse because they're not getting all of you. My wife wasn't getting all of me. My kids weren't getting all of me. My work wasn't as good as it had been in the past. So in the end, like everyone was having to deal with my stuff. They just didn't know why,
Mhm.
and to this day, like, a lot of guys that I served with, unless they've listened to like me on a podcast or whatever, probably still have no idea. They were just like, man, he used to be really good. And then after that, we kind of just was status quo guy. But yeah, the last couple years of service, I was fighting this stuff. So,
Right.
um,
Is there a particular moment that you recall, like a kind of like darkest point or rock bottom, if you're comfortable,
yeah. Are you talking about like what as a result of like,
where you were? Yeah, just like a
yeah,
point where it was like, man, I need help.
yeah, very specifically. So my kind of symptoms and how I was dealing, and I'm sure we'll get into the story of where my PTSD really developed from. But when I was dealing with it, usually what would happen, I would kind of flash back to the situation. And as soon as I would do that, I would always try to shake it away. I would have a physical response to it. So I would shake my head as if I'm trying to like shake the memories away and move past it. I would start to feel my nose burn a little bit, as I was getting emotional. My lips would kind of start quivering and like, I would start getting a little teary-eyed. I might even do it here, like as I
Yeah.
start talking about it.
Yeah, man.
But that stuff would happen, and I would shake it off. Usually, it was happening when I was driving because I was alone and it was quiet. But I would shake it away. If I did that often enough, I knew that I had to pay that penance. Like, I couldn't just do that forever.
Yeah, couldn't just lock it.
I couldn't just lock it away, and I knew that the more I put it off, the more it was going to come back. So I'd say maybe at my worst, probably once a week, after the kids were all in bed, my wife was in bed, and I was finishing up some chores around the house. I would put on. I guess I had like my depression playlist. It was like a series of songs that would like really take me there, and I would put these songs on, and dude, I would just like. There's some times where I would just kind of crumple on the floor. Or there's times where I would like just all the. It's like I had an opportunity to just let all the emotion out. I'd listen to these songs, and I would just want to go back there, and I was like angry, but I was ashamed, but I was guilty. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to freaking never touch a gun again, but then I also wanted to kill everybody. Like, it was just every emotion I could possibly have. I would just kind of like unload in those like little episodes all by myself, quietly, that nobody knew I was doing. And that's kind of like, I guess that was like the worst it would be, but the real triggering point that was like, okay, like this isn't just about me anymore, was, as I'd mentioned, this happens a lot while I'm driving.
Yeah.
And there was a day where I was driving my kids to school, and I kind of started going there, and it was one of those times where I couldn't really shake it away, and I kind of snapped out of it and realized that I'd been driving for about 15 minutes, just completely out of my body. I wasn't there. I was mechanically, I drove the car. I stayed on the highway. Thank goodness it was a straight line, and I was able to just somehow just keep on going. But if there had been anything different that day, like if a car had pulled out in front, or if there was a detour, or if there was anything outside of the norm, like it would have been as if I was sleeping and driving. Like I would have just freaking like plowed into it. And I was like, dude, like I could have really, like I could have killed my kids. I could have hurt someone else's family or killed someone else's family, all because I was like too ashamed and too scared and too embarrassed to like take care of my problem, and that's where, I guess that's where it really highlighted it. Like, this isn't just affecting me. Like this is affecting and has the potential to affect other people if I don't do something about it.
Exactly. And we talked about this last night, but you can't be the warrior. You can't be the protector. You can't be the father, the friend, the brother that you're called to be unless you take care of yourself first, unless you get the help that you need. Because like you said, how can you take care of their problems and help provide for them if you can't do that for yourself?
Yeah.
And you alluded to kind of where this PTSD came from and kind of the places that you would go. Are you comfortable talking about that, or?
Yeah. We can go there. Outside of just getting into the point to where I'm talking to people about it, there's only, I've been on 2 podcasts where I kind of opened up on about it. This will be the third one, and super valuable because obviously the whole goal of 38 Challenge. But outside of me and my doctor, I had never really told anybody about this. The only guys who knew about it was the guys on my team who were there, and then my doctor until very recently. So even being able to talk about it right now, had I not gotten help, there's no way I'd gotten through it.
Yeah.
Because when I first started seeking help, it took me months before I could even get through the entire story without just being a wreck. Like it was terrible. Yeah. So if you think that seeking help is gonna like be easy, you're gonna go in there and she or he is gonna wave a magic wand and you're gonna be fine. It's not gonna be the case. It's gonna be hard and it's gonna suck and it's gonna throw you on an emotional roller coaster. But
it's gonna be the hardest thing.
But there is,
probably ever done.
But you are gonna pop out the other side, and when you do, you'll wonder why you didn't get help sooner. But Yeah, I'll just start off, I guess, with the cliffhanger, and I'll go into details. So, I've done a lot of stuff in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I wasn't a stranger to seeing death. I wasn't a stranger to killing. I wasn't a stranger to any of that. That's war, and you know, I don't like the fact that that has to be the case, but sometimes it is. But in short, there's a time where I killed a couple kids, um, and being a father at the time, that it really freaking messed me up. It was justifiable. They had weapons, but they weren't like 17 and 16. They were like 8, 12. Like they were kids, and they were the same age as my kids at that time. And the way that whole thing went down essentially is we were down in a valley in southeast Afghanistan, kind of on the Pakistan border. And being the detachment commander at that time, I was in control of the aircraft as well. So we had an AC-130 flying above, and with like we had guys who were in a forward position. We had a sniper team out there, and I got a report from the aircraft that there were adult males, that they were up on this hillside kind of doing suspicious stuff. So I was like, all right, great, let's keep an eye on them. And I was in a great mood. I remember very specifically how, like, for one, being in the valley was great because you're not on a base, you're not around a base, like you're living like straight up cowboy life out there. And it was awesome. We were fighting ISIS, which I have a big passion for. I have no qualms killing ISIS. Like, I think they're pure evil, and I think it's righteous. It's one of those things where, like, I feel like as a religious person, I feel like God is happy for me to destroy evil on His behalf, and like I felt righteous doing that mission. I really enjoyed it, and just the excitement about, hey, this is great. We got 2 guys messing around. We got an AC-130 up top. This is very easy. We're gonna kill a couple dudes right off the bat this morning. It's gonna be a great start to the day. So we get the call again, be like, hey, yep, looks like they're digging through a cache. Looks like they're picking up weapons, and they did. They grabbed a couple weapons. They started moving towards our guys. I called the sniper team. They're like, hey, yeah, we can see them. They're just outside of range right now, but we got an eye on them. I was like, all right, cool. And there's some people that, I guess, who have never been in these situations that, even when they talk about police, like, or whatever, like if somebody attacks you with a bat, you can only fight back with a bat. Or if somebody, like, he has a knife, why'd you shoot him? Or whatever. Like, there's no fairness in war.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no reason why I should give somebody an opportunity to get close enough to shoot at the guys when I have an opportunity to stop that early. It's just a weird thing that someone would think.
Yeah,
just like when they're
makes
why
sense.
didn't you shoot him in the leg and wound him or whatever? It's like, no, dude, like that's not how
That's
this
not
works.
how it works, yeah.
No, if you're a threat, you're a threat, and you need to be eliminated. And the other part of that too is it's a psychological thing. We're about to do a big operation. We're about to go push through and clear some area. And I want any other ISIS fighters to know that should they even attempt anything, it's not even worth it. Your only options are to die or to not engage. Like, that's it. That's the only 2 outcomes you could get. So again, there was a part of it that I was like, look, let's just freaking slay these dudes and let's make it very obvious. So once we saw the weapons, once we saw them maneuvering towards our guys, I talked to my CCT, gave them the go ahead to make the call. And I said, all right, let's hammer these guys. And they did. I was like, let's put on a show. Like, let's hammer them. Let's destroy the cache. And AC-130 starts sending rounds down, which is like, again, imagine this whole time my excitement's building up as well. Not an excitement like I'm getting all giddy, like I'd never been in that situation before, but it's awesome. Like, there's parts of combat that are really awesome. Seeing howitzers shot out of an aircraft, in the sky is a really cool thing. So they're blasting and they kill these dudes. I get reports for the snipers. Hey, these guys are laying on the ground. They're dead. Awesome. Okay, great. Our air to ground engagement's done. Well, then things started getting kind of weird because the snipers call back and they're like, hey, there's people moving up to these bodies. It looks like there's women up there. Like, it looks like they're taking their rifles away, like they're hiding the weapons. I'm like, okay. I mean, we've seen that play before. Not too far out of the ordinary. We'll just keep an eye on it. Well, then we get a call from our local police guy, who's kind of our, I guess he's kind of our conduit to the villagers there. And he says, hey man, the villagers are saying you killed like a couple kids. And, when I heard that, I didn't take it too seriously. And reason being, there's a translation error or a cultural error. There's times when people will be like, oh, he's just a kid. And you realize it's like a 19-year-old dude or whatever. So when I hear kid, um, oftentimes it meant that he was like a teenager or maybe a young fighter, maybe 16 at the youngest, which unfortunately is just the way it is. ISIS, in its evilness and just how they are, like they'll recruit kids to do their stuff.
Mhm.
And it's not hard. I imagine like how easy it'd be for me to convince my kids to do anything.
Well, and when you're probably so afraid of them as well.
Yeah.
I mean,
Like, yeah,
what
it's
other,
like
what other choice do you have?
yeah, it's super easy. You tell these kids that they're fighting for freedom, they're part of the jihad. Like, again, like I can convince my kids to do anything. I imagine they could do the same thing too for young kids. Like, hey, you guys want to be good little Boy Scouts, good little ISIS fighters? Go get these guns and go shoot at the Americans. It'd be really easy because these guys are cowards. But that's what they do. So that was my expectation. And I was just going to be like, all right, well, tell them we're sorry that ISIS hired some young kids to go do this shit. That's how it is. Well, then things started getting a little bit more heated. They were like, hey, like the villagers are like really upset, and they're going to bring the bodies down and all this stuff. And at that point, I was like, okay, well, I need to get there because I wasn't at that site. I was about 30 minutes away at our base camp, and where we were at, we were on ATVs and razors, like little Polaris razors. The roads didn't support driving around big armored vehicles. So we were always very vulnerable driving around. And because of that, the villagers and everybody around us, it was really important that we maintained good rapport with them and that we had a good relationship and that they trusted us because like they were really our like second line of defense. It's them being willing to let us know that, hey, someone is setting something up, or even to say like, even just to keep people who don't belong there out of that town. That's how we were able to move around through there. If not, like it's pretty easy to stitch up a guy on an ATV. It doesn't take a big explosion to freaking take something like that out. So we did owe it to them to do our best to resolve the situation. As the commander at that time, I zipped down there with a couple guys, linked up with the rest of the team, and there's definitely a lot of commotion there. Like we had our commandos there, which was our unit that wasn't from the area that we worked with. We had the local police, and then we had the villagers. And it's getting hectic, and people are yelling at each other and all this. I tell my guys, I was like, hey, there's potential for like things to get pretty hot here, so keep an eye out. Make sure the vehicles are ready to go. That way, if we got to get out quick, we can do that. I'll handle this stuff. You guys just keep an eye out. So I work with the local police guy. We walk up. They're like, hey, they're bringing the bodies here right now. I was like, all right, great. Look, I know what we saw. They had weapons. Even if they were young, they had weapons. I'm sorry. So the vehicle pulls up. They walked me up to the back of the truck. It was a white Hilux. I remember specifically because it came up through this rocky outcropping. It was like a dried up riverbed. I'm not outcropping, I'm sorry. It was like a dried up riverbed with kind of cliffs on both sides. So it drives up, finally gets there. I walk up to the back, tailgate's down, and there's two bodies underneath these blankets. You can see the outlines of them. And the first thing they pull back is they pull back the blanket just down to the neck. And that's when I realized that when they said kids, they meant kids. But what was really bizarre about it was that their faces were very clean. Like to me, what I saw is they were very clean and they just looked so innocent because they would just look like sleeping kids, which I'd seen my own kids sleep 100 times. I love it. And when I saw that, because they were the same ages as my kids, like my kids kind of became them. Like when I looked at that, even now, when I look back at the situation, like those are the kids' faces that I see now are my own kids' faces in that scenario. And maybe that lasted 5 seconds, but to me it felt like just like forever. In that moment when I looked there, everything else shut off. Everything else was cloudy. I couldn't hear or understand anything else that was going on. I was just zoned in as I just saw what I saw. And a lot of that was because I knew that I did do that. Like I was excited. I was happy to have killed these people. And when I don't know, it's just when it translated to my brain is like what I had actually done is like all these emotions just started kicking in. It was just anger and shame and guilt and all that stuff. But in a situation like that, you don't have the opportunity, you don't have the luxury to cope. You don't have the luxury to like, you can't break down. Like you've got stuff to do. You have guys who are counting on you. So you put that shit in your pocket. You deal with it later. Well, from that point, they pulled the blankets back, and that's where all the damage was. They were dismembered for the most part, like every limb, and once they pulled the blankets back, is when like people really started like yelling and all this shit, and like people were picking up these little kids' limbs, and they were like waving it in front of my face, like look at this little kid's arm, look at this little, just to like show me, like look, you killed them, look, they're dead, like just like really drive the point home. And at some point, not too long after that, I just say, hey, I fucking get it. Like, that's enough. I know they're dead. I'm sorry. They're kids, but they had guns. We didn't kill these kids. ISIS killed these kids. We just fucking finished. We just finished it off. They put them in this situation. They're the ones at fault here. We're sorry. And, they were trying to get us to pay for funeral costs and all this stuff too. And it's kind of like, you can't give into that. You can't like, okay, because it's almost like you're admitting guilt, like you're admitting that you did something wrong. And, we couldn't be put in that situation to where, hey, we paid for the cost because we shouldn't have done this. We didn't want to create that scenario. Like we knew what we did was right. And even looking back at the scenario, all things in the same place that they were, I would make the same decision again, with all the same parameters.
Yeah, how could you have known?
There's no other decision.
Yeah.
So it's just the result of that's what war is. Like war is ugly, and in a 360-degree battlefield where you've got people who were in the village that want to attack you, people from foreign fighters. There's just like, it's such an ugly, non-conventional fighting situation there that it's not just like when you play as a kid where there's the Green Army and the Tan Army and they fight each other and no civilians die. It's just these guys. That's not how it is. So yeah, it's just one of the ugly truths of war. And either way, we're like, all right, well, we need to get out of here. Either way, like we said what we need to say. We're going to get out of here. Things are just getting worse. We need to let the situation settle down. But we're pretty vulnerable where we're at. We're extremely outnumbered. There's probably only like 10 of us there, 10 U.S. guys there at most. So we get in our vehicles. I remember I was in a Polaris Razor in the passenger seat. I had a saw, so a 249 machine gun on a pintle out the door. And the way to get out of there was really terrible tactically. And it's because you had to go through this dried creek bed. And I said there was like 30-foot walls on both sides. One side had buildings on it, kind of right butted up right against the cliff. The other side was rock bands and things like that. But it was one of those situations where it's like if you took an ambush from the high ground while you were passing through there and you were in the vehicles that we were in, which again was like ATVs and stuff, there wasn't going to be a good outcome. To the point to where I don't even think my machine gun could even elevate high enough on the pintle to like hit those cliff bands. Like I would have had to dismount the gun to even use it. And as we were driving through there and it started to hit me a little bit more, I just had this thought that like man, like we're going to get hit. Like I just know it. And if we do, it's because I deserve it. And at that point, I kind of decided that like I wanted to get hit that day. Like I didn't want any of my guys to get hurt, but if we got hit and I got killed, I just felt like that's what was supposed to happen. Like just immediate eye for an eye karma. Like, hey, I did this. I'm gonna get my punishment. I'm gonna receive my punishment. And I was almost disappointed when it didn't happen. We made it through and it was super quiet. Nothing happened. So we get back to our little camp and I download all my gear and I go into my little room that I shared with my friend Matt. And when I got there, I just broke down. Like I grabbed him and I just started crying. And I was just like, dude, what the fuck are we doing, man? I was like, I just killed these fucking kids. And, that was kind of, that was it. That's the That's the story. That's what did it. And I went a number of years. I did another combat deployment after that, very successful combat deployment. I still did decent in my career at that point, but it's because I guess I was just so busy and had other things going on that I was able to hide it pretty well, and I was able to just shove it down my pocket and not deal with it. It wasn't until I slowed down, moved into a new job where I had a little bit more time, that it started getting worse and worse. My motivation to do anything got worse. It's almost like anytime things started to go well, I held it against myself.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would feel guilty for being successful because I felt like I owed it to those kids to live a shitty life. Like that was my penance. Like I was like, look, I shouldn't have a good life because of what I did. And I applied that to myself. And that's how I ran for a number of years, 3-4 years maybe, where I just didn't like the thought of being successful. I wasn't working out as much. I wasn't I just wasn't who I was.
Mm-hmm.
I was just destined to just be a middle of the road guy. And anytime I did anything good, I would kind of feel like I deserved to be punished for it. So yeah, and that's where I was until I got some help. So yeah.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what that feeling must have been like / be like. And I want to thank you for showing that level of strength. And I'm so glad that you did get help, because how could someone live with that burden without the help of others?
Yeah.
What did the help seeking process look like for you? How are you able to work through that trauma?
So what's funny is I'd actually kind of reached out once before unsuccessfully to get help. And, it's going to sound like a huge swing and a miss from the Army side. But I think guys need to understand that it is real, that maybe you might seek help and you don't get it. And maybe you got to seek it from someone else. And that was my situation. And honestly, what made it even harder, because we were about to do my next deployment. It was maybe a year after that. So me and my wife, we've got a number of kids at home and deployments are stressful. So we were like, well, let's do like a pre-deployment marital counseling. Let's get together and just talk to a counselor and just see if they can say something that makes it hurt, because we know it's going to be tough and, deployments suck, but it's the way it is. So while we were talking with this counselor, she was like, is there anything that's bothering you, anything, whatever? And I kind of opened up a little bit, and I was like, well, yeah, I killed some kids last deployment, and, it kind of bothers me, and I break down occasionally. I was kind of like getting emotional about it. It was the first time my wife had like heard or knew anything about that. So I think she was like kind of like crying a little bit too. And the doctor was like, yeah, well, war can be tough. And that was it. And then she just continued on through the process of like so, you're going to be gone and it's going to be hard for you. It's just like, completely like, I feel like I just like sent up a flare and she just swatted it down and was just like, yeah, war can be tough. And when she did that, I put a lot of trust in the fact that she's a mental health counselor.
Mm-hmm.
So when she did that, it was just like, yeah, you're right. War can be tough. I'm just being a bitch, like I'd kind of like, she unvalidated my issue to where I was like, yeah, man, what am I complaining about? This is normal for me to deal with this. Everybody deals with this shit. I'm just being a wuss here. And it's one of those things that, when you let your walls down and it doesn't work out, those walls go back up. And when they go back up, they go up higher and they're reinforced, because now you're like, dude, I tried to be vulnerable and I just basically in my mind got told that I need to get over it, so it's like, fuck, man. And that was the first time that I tried to get some help for it. I wouldn't say I tried hard, but I guess I kind of like opened the door because I was a little bit embarrassed about it, especially with my wife being there.
Yeah, that was an incredibly hard and brave thing to do.
I guess it was just sitting in that chair.
I'm sure.
I just felt like it was like, okay, maybe I can say this, but yeah, like.
And I'm sure it was like, had been at the core of who you were for so long. Like I'm sure every part of you just wanted to get that off of your back and off of your chest.
Yeah.
And like that was, you finally had the courage
And that was
to
it.
do
And it was just like, boom, swat it down. So, so, um, so from there, you know, it was a couple years after that. Like I said, I did my next deployment, moved into my last position, which was more administrative in nature. So I had a lot more time at home, had a lot more time to kind of process things. And that's where, like I said, the symptoms just got worse and worse. And like I'd mentioned earlier, it wasn't until that friend of mine who we just linked up. He was one of my guys on my team. He was there. He was one of the snipers. And probably one of the guys that I fully trust and always confided in, like to kind of check me. Hey, is what I'm doing right? Does this make sense? So I always had a high level of trust with him. And he gave me the card of the lady that he'd been talking to. He's like, hey, like, don't talk to the lady you were talking to. He's like, call her, get in with her. She's the one who helped me. So I did. I made an appointment, and it took, I don't know, a month or so for me to finally get in. And when I did, like I said, it's not easy. She's like, hey, tell me the whole story. I want you to close your eyes and tell me the whole story. When you tell me the whole story, I want you to be there. I want you to tell me what you thought. I want you to tell me your emotions. I want you to tell me the smells. I want you to tell me every single thing about it as if you're there. And gosh, that was tough. That was so hard because I had been avoiding it for so long. I had never retold the story in my mind over and over. All I did was fight it and fight it and fight it. That I'd never allowed myself to even like go back there and relive it. And we did that once a week for months. And each time it got a little bit easier. I'd be able to make it a little bit further. And then not only did I have to say it, but I had to record myself saying it. I had to record the story on my phone. And then at home, on days where I didn't go, I had to listen to myself whimper and cry and blow snot and just be a fucking mess. I had to listen to that stuff. And it just got easier and easier. And I hated listening to myself. I just felt like I hated listening to myself say the story. I just felt so weak and just, it sucked. I didn't do it all the time, like full transparency. Like I didn't have the discipline to do it every single day. There's times where I just didn't fucking want to do it and I didn't do it. But,
understandable.
Yeah. But like, it was one of those things that's just like, I don't want to go there on my time off when I'm home and then walk back into the house as if everything's cool. Like I just didn't want to do that. But I did occasionally. I have animals and I like livestock. I would go out and hang out with my goats and like kind of be in my safe place with non-judgmental animals that like, you know, make you laugh. So that's where I would go and do that. And I said, it just got easier. And once we got past the point to where I could tell the story, that's when we started figuring out, okay, so why are you acting the way you are? And what we realized is this: I had applied this level of guilt to myself, where I just felt like I said, I just felt like I had a penance to pay. Like maybe it was to God, maybe it was to those kids, maybe it was to whoever, I don't know. But I just applied this. And, you know, she's like, look, like, you didn't need to do that. You know, you didn't need to apply that guilt. You didn't need to put yourself in a situation where anything you do to improve yourself is a dishonor to those kids. Like, don't forget the story. You don't have to forget the story. Remember the story. Remember the lessons from it. You know, for me, the lessons on it is like, hey, just everybody remember that evil does exist.
Yeah.
And ugly shit does happen.
Yeah.
And, you know, people shouldn't be so excited about starting wars and getting into stuff, especially if they're not going to be the ones doing it, you know, because the shit's ugly. And I think anybody that's truly been involved in war and watched their friends get hurt and killed and had to take lives, is there a fun, exciting aspect to it? Yeah. Is there a part where it feels righteous? Sometimes. But for the most part, there's a lot of unnecessary death that happens, and it sucks. A lot of innocent people. And even for those kids, were they innocent? I consider them innocent just in that they were put in a situation that they didn't understand.
Yeah.
Was it justified killing? Yes, it also was. But those two things can't exist together. So, yeah, like even getting help, I would kind of relapse a little bit, and I would feel guilty about getting help. You know, I'd be like, I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't be getting help. I'm supposed to be a wreck. And we had to bounce back through a couple of those too. I finally got to the point to where I truly believed that it was okay to move on. I still occasionally go there. I manage a little bit better, but that was the journey, and like exponentially, my life has improved just in my optimism, my ability to be happy again. Like the little things that would like set me off with my kids and stuff, and just you know, it's completely different reaction now.
Back to the
Back to who I am.
Yeah.
Which is generally just like a very caring, empathetic person. But yeah, it took a long time to get there. So
when you were going and as you were seeking help and working through this just unexplainable trauma, did you have to like learn to like love yourself again, or like even like kind of
yeah,
learn whatever that is? Because I feel like that's, for me, like that's a hard thing to do, right? It's like, how
Yeah.
does one?
Yeah. I think it just kind of happened,
Yeah.
through the healing process is I was able to do that because I just already kind of, it's like if you've got a ladder to happiness and you just kind of like put a grate on top of it that you could never get past a certain point. I feel like I was able to remove that to where I could be happy again, like legitimately.
Mhm.
Because every time I was happy before, I just felt like there was a big boot that came down that would like kick me back down, every time I tried. And that got removed. So I wouldn't say there was like a deliberate like, oh great, I can be happy again, but I just noticed that I'm a happier person.
you're able to,
I'm just
yeah.
able to be happy. I'm able to move on. I can be optimistic about my future. My plans after getting out of the military were like, I just want to disappear. I want to be a nobody. I don't want to grow. Maybe I'll just drive a truck around or whatever. Like I had no desire to do anything that would make me better or that would improve my situation because I just felt like I didn't deserve it. So yeah, that all that stuff opened back up after I got some help. Yeah.
I'm so glad you did, man. So glad you did.
Yeah.
Well, transitioning a little bit, because, dealing with the trauma that you had to deal with, right, and the things that you've seen and the things that you've done, right, you've also experienced a lot of traumatic brain injuries, right, which makes processing and which makes the way that your brain works, and it changes the way that it functions. So then dealing with those things is even more difficult because you're doing it with a brain that's injured. What's
those things overlap a lot.
Yeah. What's your experience with traumatic brain injury?
So I never had like the one big one, that you think about. It's like, hey, if like,
well, I think that's a good thing because I think in the military, people only think of I wasn't blown up in a Humvee, right? Or,
exactly.
Or I didn't have overhead pressure. Like,
Yeah.
but that's not, it's little, or not even little. It's the different levels of blast exposure that you go through and training, and that has a huge toll.
And I say thank goodness, like we're finally seeing that, and those studies are being done, because I think a lot of guys, including myself, disqualified ourselves from getting treatment for TBI because we're like, well, TBI is for this guy I know that legitimately got hit by an IED, or it's for this guy that like fell from a high distance and cracked his skull. Like, we kind of like just disqualified ourselves because we didn't really know what the threshold was. Like, what's the big one? What's big enough to cause a brain injury? What's, and what we always thought, it's like, well, traumatic brain injury, that has to be one instance, one traumatic experience that caused it. And, I started getting a lot of issues with recalling, short-term memory. Like names would go in one ear, right out the other. Like I was just really bad at that. And I just remember I just wasn't as sharp as I used to be. I was like, man, like I'm forgetting a lot of stuff. Or like literally I go to the grocery store after having talked back to all the things I was supposed to get there and just wondering like, what the heck am I even doing? Or at its worst, like I'm driving into town and completely forgetting like where I was even going. Like I'm just driving right now. What the heck was I even doing right now? After like, So when I so the place they have for the Army, one of the places they have to do for treatments, the Intrepid Spirit Center, and that's where the behavioral health team is. Well, that's where also the TBI side is. So when I said that I was having these memory issues, she was like, "Okay, well, I think that's also kind of TBI." And I was like, "Well, I don't think I've had like anything like that." And she's like, "Well, have you been around a lot of blasts?" I was like, "Well, yeah." "Have you breached a lot of doors?" "Yeah." "Have you shot a lot of rockets and things like that?" I was like, "Yeah, all the time." She's like, "Well, like
Every single
expo."
one of those
Yeah,
is a MTBI
yeah,
potentially.
yeah. So she's like, so they're like, "Okay, well, I'm going to make you an appointment with the TBI doctor." So I sat down with him and we went over that. I was like, "Yeah, I've shot a number of Carl Gustavs, which is like a kick in the head every time you shoot one, and you shoot like 8 or 9 or 10 of those things in a day or like in a sequence, like that's not a good thing."
No, dude.
Or just the number of charges you've been around, or mortars or whatever. I've had a couple um, close mortars in my career that have come by, and they were like, "Yeah, like this is exactly what we see, is that it's not necessarily just the one big event. It's prolonged exposure over a period of time of repetitive blasts
Hmm.
can cause the same issues as like the big one, if you want to call it that." So that's where, I realized, oh shoot, well,
And I think that
you
that's
know,
there needs to be a lot of, and that's the point of these conversations, that people need to understand that, you know,
yeah,
that in it of itself can cause psychological, biological, like so many different changes.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. And guys do it, like even guys who aren't deploying, as right now the GWATs, come to an end, but guys are still training. There's still guys at the range who are eating charges every single day. So, I think there really needs to be a look at what are we doing prophylactically to make sure that, even though, yeah, you got your pro and you get your MSD, so your distance away from the charge, but what are we doing to make sure that the brain isn't getting freaking rattled just a little bit each single time? So I think it is super important to look at, long-term effects of what's our training doing. We can't stop. Like we need to be lethal.
of course, and
We need to be
that's
proficient.
difficult.
Yeah,
That's the very hard part to navigate, because we
yeah,
need to create the best warriors in the world,
yeah,
but we also have to find ways to
yeah.
protect their brains
Because
so that when they come,
yeah,
yeah,
because what happens to our best warriors in the world? They're okay or good enough mentally. They do the job. They're excellent,
and then they come
and
back.
then they come back home. Who knows how long? Maybe a year after they get out. Maybe 5 years. Maybe 10 years after they get out. These things really start to hit. And they don't even know why. They're just different. Same things I was feeling. Um, it's like, well, it's because we didn't understand what we were doing that whole time. So,
Yeah, and the way that you and I were introduced through H.V.M.N.
mhm.
and ketone IQ, can you kind of, you said, I remember very specifically, you said, "I love ketone IQ and I love my job because I just want to help people. I want to
Yeah,
get this product to people and I want to help them with their brain health."
yeah,
Can you explain how that product works and how it's helped you in your life and some of these other guys who are dealing with the effects of TBI?
yeah. So a kind of unique, I guess, kind of unique story. So I was running the mountain school at the time, and I got introduced to the company because SOCOM had given a grant to study exogenous ketone use at altitude to see if it protected against cognitive loss. At altitude, there's a higher demand, not a higher demand. There's the same demand, but there's less quantity of oxygen per particle to fuel your brain. So there's a natural decline in your cognitive function, brain function, when you're at altitude. Well, ketones, they take less oxygen to turn into energy, and because of that, it's more efficient in fueling the brain. So you don't have that same loss. And so that's how I got involved with the company, is just doing that study, because we had guys who were trained between 10 and 14,000 feet on a daily basis. So we were the test bed to see if it worked. And over the years, helping facilitate those studies and starting to use the product on my own, just to like experiment with it or use it for, see how I liked it. I just noticed that I was doing better. Like I felt sharper, and I just didn't feel like I was lost as often as I was. And as I started working more and more with the team, especially as I got ready to retire, I started doing an internship with the team, learning more about the product, working with their research lead. And I was like, hey man, like I feel like my TBI stuff is better. Like, can you explain like what, like why? You know, that's not why I'm using this, but it seems to be doing that like as an ancillary benefit. He's like, well, yeah, there have been like we've been studying, we studied animal cases and have seen like, hey, like there is science that points to the fact that this should either restore or recover um, like damaged or like diluted brain function just by being able to fuel the brain more efficiently. And that's kind of where we're at. There's not like there's a lot of data on it, like I said, on the animal side, and there's a lot of like theoretically this should work based off what we see, but there's
And it sounds like testimonies from guys
yeah,
that have given this stuff too.
yeah, like the testimonies are, you know, guys that I've given it to. It's myself using it because one of the things I never wanted to do, no matter what, was as a treatment option, I didn't want to get on opioids and I didn't want to take antidepressants because I'd seen guys who'd gone down that road, and it's like at times it's worse than the symptoms they had in the first place. Opioids are incredibly addictive. They're expensive. Honestly, I think it's a racket. Like I think the pharmaceutical companies just have an end that they shouldn't have, and they just push this stuff so hard. Um, so I was like, I don't want to do any of that stuff. And I was like, dude, this is working for me. Like I like it. And
I think an important point to note is that
Yep.
it works for some people, and for some people it doesn't work at all. Right? It's can have the opposite effect.
you're talking about like opioid and all that stuff?
Well,
Or just, like,
opioids, no, but like I mean, just like finding not opioids, but just like finding whatever. Like medication does work for some people.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't want to say like
Right.
that nobody should ever take an antidepressant. There's
Right.
different paths for
Yeah,
different
no,
people.
and that was
Yeah.
your choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
In your path.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
exactly. That's just what I wanted to go down.
Right.
Because I've also like, I guess I always took pride in not wanting to have an addiction to something,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't want to put myself in a situation where I had to have something for the rest of my life.
Yep.
So I mean, I don't know. I'll probably just use ketones. Like,
Yeah,
I think
right,
that's by
right.
I think that's by choice.
Right.
But yeah, so I started using it for my own stuff, and I just, you know, when the company asked if I wanted to be involved with them after I retired, I was like, well, if that means that I could get this, if I could work to get this to the guys who are getting the blasts, or the guys who are going on operations, or the guys who are going in the mountains or diving, or free fall guys that are up in hypoxic environments all the time, like yeah, like I'm in. So, you know, yeah, I have a sales job with the company. You know, I run that side of the program, but the other part of that is working with the military and working with, you know, like your organization, working with you know, any of the medical researchers, and just trying to make this a possible treatment option. You know, getting it to the TBI clinics as an alternative. You know, a much cheaper alternative, but just an alternative to see, hey, like let's try this because it's natural and it's cheaper, and if it works, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if it doesn't work, okay, we'll go somewhere else. But you know, just the opportunity to get it back to the guys, got stuff that I wish I had 5-10 years ago. You know, because Lord knows how many energy drinks I would freaking slam on operations or before an operations when it was like the wrong kind of energy. That's just stimulants. That's not fuel. You know, so
Right.
yeah, I guess that's kind of, I guess, my ulterior motive, or maybe it's my main motive. I don't know. With the company,
Yeah.
is get the stuff to the guys and get it to where they don't have to pay for it. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it, man. Yeah, and I absolutely love the product. We took a shot of ketone IQ before this podcast, and
Yeah.
been locked in the whole time,
You're
man.
just locked in.
Yeah,
yeah.
you're
I don't do one without it. Like,
yeah. You're
or
clear,
else
man.
you'd find a lot of like me staring off into space, and you know, like
Me too. You know, as we wrap up, man, one, I just thank you again for having the strength to share that trauma, and your story is going to help a lot of guys who are in that place right now and who just feel guilt and shame, but who are deserving of happiness, right? And deserving of moving on and living a life that they're meant to.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that you've found that and have begun to find healing.
yeah, man. I really appreciate.